Hi, welcome back. So we just finished the game SOMA. What'd you all think? Um, I thought, this might be a good opportunity to just sort of take a moment to talk about the game and reflect on kind of what had happened and maybe some of the things that we've learned. SOMA is a very thought-provoking game, which is one of the reasons that I'm so personally intrigued by its themes um, and its elements, which are just so eerie. They kind of leave you with this sense of nothing's okay and nothing's gonna ever be okay again, but in a weird way, maybe things are kind of okay not being okay. And I can kind of relate to that, especially with everything that's been going on the last few years here in the US and all across the world. Um, yeah, but, that's too big of a scope for this video. So why don't we just stick to the game, huh? Yeah. So, SOMA. Um, Basically we were just this guy, right? We worked at a bookstore in Toronto, and Simon Jarrett, he worked at a bookstore in Toronto, and he got in a car accident. I presume the person he was with passed away based on context, and he went in for a brain scan, and the next thing he knew, he woke up, right? And he was just in this horrible nightmare world. But in reality, he was not the real Simon Jarrett, right? The real Simon Jarrett went on to go back to work, I think, and live his life for a month before I think we figured out that he passed away for whatever reason, probably related to his head injury. Um, but we were a continuation of that consciousness, even though we weren't actually Simon Jarrett, right? He died, but for some reason we were super. The idea that we were Simon Jarrett was super pervasive to the main protagonist of the game. And this like theme of existentialism and consciousness is a theme that I'm very fond of personally. I really like things that force you to think about them. Uh, it's like, what does it mean to actually be human? Is flesh what makes us human? If so, how much flesh do you need, right? Like, some humans have less flesh than other humans. You know, uh, there are people who are born with limb differences. There are people who are born with skin differences. There are people who are born with all sorts of differences, and they're all equally human. There are people who, require the use of machinery in order for them to survive or even interact with their environment, right? And I don't think that makes them any less human, right? And so as humans start to augment ourselves and our capabilities, it's really hard to try to establish the line where we cross from being human to non-human. What's funny about Simon Jarrett is that his duplicate, the one that we played, it was a human body, but it didn't have a head. It did have some robot parts kind of crammed into the neck, which I found quite disturbing, but delightfully kind of funny. Um, so that's another theme, right? Is this transhumanism with technology? At what point do we say this person has stopped being a human and started becoming a robot? And I think what really pushes the bounds on that is our interaction with other beings, right? I think in the very first creature, I guess you could say, that we came across, right, was in episode 1. I heard screaming and I opened that door and this thing barreled out and knocked me on my butt. And I hardly saw what it was. It was just screaming and ran out the door. I don't know what that was. Perhaps somebody woke up with their consciousness in a really terrifying creature. I don't know. There were times where we'd go out and we found, mechanical automatons that were seemingly lost in their own world. There was the one that was sort of jacked into the computer when we first met Catherine on that little screen in episode 1. This person's voice came out of that robot, but we tried to interact with it. It wouldn't do anything. It wouldn't say anything. But the moment we went to unplug it, it would say, what did it say? It said, "Don't." And then when we unplugged the second one, because we needed the power ultimately, I think what it said was something to the effect of, "But I was happy." And so it's hard to say, like, do I think that person is even a person? If they literally cannot even interact with the external world? Maybe. There are people who, exist in that state, right? There are people who are in a vegetative state, people who are comatose, and there are also, other types of mental illness or experiences that people can have that leave them unable to move or interact really in meaningful ways. So if this person can't interact with their external environment and they also are completely made of metal and circuitry, it's really difficult to say that they are still human, right? But maybe they are. I don't know. I don't have that answer. I'm just sort of rehashing things and hoping to get feedback from other people because I would like some of your opinions. What do you think? There was a robot that helped us out. It was absolutely not human. It was just a friendly little helper bot. What do we call him? BuddyBot 9000, right? He was just helpful. I don't think he had any sort of consciousness. He just had some kind of AI. There was another robot, just kind of meandering out in the near Delta, I think. And he was just seemingly off in his own world. He was like giving people instructions, telling us to get out of the way. So he could talk to us minimally and interact with us minimally, but he didn't seem to be interacting in real life. He barely even really recognized us. And I think in the end we had to steal a chip from him. Yeah. At what point do you say, oh, this is not, consciousness? That's another thing. How do we define consciousness? Like conscious reality. But, there's a difference between a conscious reality where someone is present and one in which someone is kind of seemingly off in their own world. And people do exist in that state also. So to say, oh, this robot with a human consciousness is not a person because they're off in their own world, well, that's not exactly accurate, right? Because there are human beings that we know of who are sort of off in their own reality. And then you have these other beings that we came across that were quite dangerous. But the way the game had kind of explained them was that they were not evil. They weren't really like malevolent in any sense. It was more that they had a goal and they were going to go off and make sure that goal was achieved. And anything that stood in their path would ultimately, they would do whatever they could to stop that goal. So it's hard to say whether or not those beings had consciousness. A lot of them took humanoid form. They had humanoid bodies for the most part. I'm thinking in particular the guy with the sort of, or maybe it was a gal, I'm not sure. They had a diving helmet and lots of blue lights coming out of their diving helmet, and they were sort of like able to glitch and teleport. It's hard to say if that person's human, right? There was definitely like stuff going off, but it more sounded like radio chatter than actual communication. And then when we had that final boss battle, that thing was just vicious, and it instantly just came to kill us, right? It didn't talk. All it did was hunt. And then at the very end, the last guy we run into, who turned out to be, I believe, Johann Ross. I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. I might be wrong. But I think it was Johann Ross. And he was helping us the whole time to try to get us to eliminate the WoW. And he definitely appeared to have the whole shebang, right? He was glitchy. He could teleport. He could communicate telepathically. He was distorted. He had the pustules and the technology running through him and the glowing blue orbs, right? But he was still within his conscious mind enough to kind of direct us in our actions and give us hints as to what we should be doing. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is I really like that this game, something that I really like about this game is how it does a really good job of blurring the lines, And like I had said during the gameplay, it's like, that's what it does. It goes, are you willing to kill a robot? Okay. Are you willing to kill a robot that has a human attached to it? Are you willing to kill a robot that might have human consciousness? Are you willing to just straight up kill a human? Speaking of which, there were a lot of really difficult situations in that game too. And if you're playing it for the first time, which I kind of was, not really, I've played it before, but it had been such a long time since I played it that I had forgotten what the story was about and any of the gameplay. It was like a brand new experience for me. And I'll tell you, if you really don't know how the game is going to end, it's really hard to make the right choices. And I think that that's really great design for a game that, updates and is dynamic and makes it so that the choices you're making in the game matter. I think there are 5 endings to that game. I might go back and replay it some to try to get some of the other endings. Let me know if that's something you want me to do. But something else I wanted to talk about was SOMA's ability to tell a story environmentally. And, you saw with my gameplay, it by no means was like 100% completion. There were things I missed. And, of course, by the 3rd episode, I went back and replayed through some of the way, and I missed some stuff entirely. There was the one guy who was stuck in the robot. He had died at a service panel, and we found his ID, right? But somehow his consciousness had been shifted into this machine, and he was just laying there, unable to believe that he was a robot, or in the body of a robot. And Simon keeps trying to explain to him reality, but he really won't accept it. And then we had to pull that lever for power, and it was causing this guy to become electrocuted, right? And it was, he was screaming out. It was very painful for him. It was very scary for him. The first playthrough. The second playthrough, we didn't even talk to him at all. And during the first playthrough, we went through that area pretty much no problem. But the second playthrough, we had a really gnarly monster after us the whole time we were in that area. So, yeah, definitely your choices matter. The game is dynamic. I remember the first time we played, I chose not to kill Amy. The second time, my curiosity got the better of me. I know I'm a terrible person, but I really wanted to know what was behind that door. Unfortunately, and it serves me right, I flipped the switch too early, and so when I did go back and kill Amy, it didn't matter because I wasn't able to use the door anyway. So I'm still curious what was behind that door. But if you were to go behind that door, I'm guessing what I would have found is some sort of thing to add to the lore, something that would have given us a clue as to what was going on with the WoW. You know, we saw a lot of bodies that we were able to sort of reach into their black box and figure out what was happening during their last moments of life. We saw we did a lot of data mining, right, with different various boxes on the walls. We got a lot of story with like Acres and the other lab mates that had basically just like pumped themselves full of structure gel and removed their eyes. Yeah. And, you know, SOMA really does blend horror with science fiction. Two of my favorite genres. I really think that they go together well because sci-fi in and of itself is very interesting on its own. But when you think about the reality of the things that are posed in sci-fi, such as being stuck in space or being stuck in this case, at the bottom of the ocean. Technically, I guess it was both, but those are really scary things where anything and everything can and will go wrong at a moment's notice, and there may not be a right answer as to how to fix it. And I think that very much lends to the horror genre, and we saw that with this game. And, you know, the emotional impact that it provides really leaves you wondering, looming, trying to think about, was there something I could have done better? Was there something I could have done differently? Looking back, I wouldn't have killed Amy. I wouldn't hurt the robot that really couldn't understand that he was a robot. I would have tried not to hurt anybody. I think Amy, you have to unplug one of her things. She's got 2 tendrils. You have to unplug one, and it kind of screws her up, but you need it for the power in order to progress in the game. I think, please let me know if there's another way to do that, because I would rather do something else other than hurt her. You know, so I want to talk about the isolation and loneliness of the game, because I feel like this ties into the emotional impact. And also a little bit about morality and choice, right? We wake up as Simon Jarrett, and we are isolated. There is nobody around, and everything is horrible and scary. And the only contact we have with any semblance of life is mechanical and terrifying. And then we come to find out that the majority of people who were here have either died or have become some sort of monstrosity or contraption, right? Even Catherine was like stuck in our Omni tool for the entire game once we found her. And the real Catherine was even dead, right? We found her later. She'd been hit with a wrench or something. There was a bloody wrench next to her body. So, you know, time and time again, we come across this isolation and loneliness. With Simon, with Catherine, who's sort of blipping in and out of existence. We found it with the various robots that are just stuck on their own with a human consciousness implanted, and they don't really know what's going on. Even the monsters are isolated, and some of them have to be released, but if they don't have to be released, they're at least wandering aimlessly with nothing to do except hunt the next thing they see, right? When you're wandering through that black void, trying to get to the next base from outside in the deep waters, that's very isolating and scary. And you see even lost souls, is what it seems like, just sort of melancholy and concerned, wandering out in the waters. Among, once we get into the deep depths, then there's treacherous waters with horrifying creatures that have been impacted by the WoW, and even they seem sort of isolated in their own right. And we come across Amy, who is alone, and she's like, what kind of life is this? I'm stuck here with this thing breathing. I'm just scared. Please, if you run into my friends, let them know that I'm here. We pretty much suspect that her friends are probably dead. We later find out that we were right about that assumption. We go on to meet the last, quote unquote, the last woman on Earth, or the last person on Earth, which is Sarah. If we hadn't killed Amy, we could have told Sarah, hey, you're actually not the last one. Amy's also alive, sort of, though she's being kept artificially alive by the WoW. And also at one point we had to jump into a new body, and I made the choice to leave Simon 2.0 alive as we became Simon 3 version 3.0, right? And Catherine said, oh, he'll wake up in a few days, but you can decide what to do with him. We could have just killed him, but I figured, well, I guess I'll leave him because, I'd want the choice. He should have the choice. And then we found Sarah, right? And after knowing what I know now, I realized that there were people that were alive, and there were also robots with consciousness, much like ourselves. We were not that different, right? The whole way through. And then everybody at the end in the arc was also a virtual reality version of themselves. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think I would have kept everyone alive, and I would have done my best to try not to harm anybody, in hopes that by the end of it all, when Simon and Catherine, the version that are stuck at the bottom of Tau, or Phi, where they launched other Simon, and final Catherine off into the Ark, right? But, you have this other Simon and Catherine who are stuck hopeless. And then they get in an argument, and Catherine fries out in the Omni tool, and then the game ends and the credits roll, and you're left wondering, well, whatever happened to Catherine? Is that it? Did she die? Is she gone now? Is there another copy of her somewhere else on the base, or any of the other bases? And unfortunately, I get the feeling that there isn't, and I'm worried about that. But, that Simon and that Catherine could have had hope at least knowing a few people down at the bottom of the ocean. It's not much of a life, but if it's all you've got, you might as well take what you can. And I don't know, though, maybe that's another thing is what life did they have to live? Everything's terrifying and scary. There's monsters everywhere. Without the WoW, at least a few of those people would have to stop existing, because they were being kept alive by the WoW. And if you left the WoW alive, is that ethical? Maybe to keep the WoW alive so that you're keeping other creatures alive and just let it spread? It's not like it's really doing much more harm than it already did, because the world had already ended due to impact, right? At least as far as humans are concerned. So, kind of who cares what the WoW is doing if it's keeping things alive, right? I don't know. So there's another really cool theme about the video game is focusing on the ethics of biotechnology. I really like that they gave the player, me, a sense of agency and like really made this an immersive experience. They were so good at getting you to let your guard down at the right time and then becoming absolutely terrifying at the right time, and really forcing you to think about what you were doing. Like, I remember that moment with Sarah when we kind of needed to put her out of her misery, right? Because she had no life to look forward to. She was just in pain. Everything was really scary. And there was just nothing left for her. And she asked us to pull the plug. And then we had, she wanted us to sit and wait with her. And so we did. And then eventually she passed on. And it's like, man, how do you process that, There were other really dark things in this game that were hard to process as well. Trigger warning, I'm going to be talking about suicide, but like one of the bigger tropes about this was that in order for people to, merge their consciousness with the Ark, they thought that they needed to start killing themselves because they didn't want to become the copy of them that was left behind. And so they came under the impression that the copy that they are would be put onto the Ark as long as their body ceased to exist as the transformation was happening, which is totally illogical, doesn't make any sense. There is no reason to believe that. There is no evidence to support it at all. But it was something that, a good number of the crewmates were, they really believed it enough that they took their own lives, and that really goes to show, the impact of like superstition, I guess, and that sort of just having blind faith in something. And it's like, is it good that they had that faith? Maybe it helped them. Maybe they were right. I don't know. They could be right, for all I know. I don't think they're right, because I don't think that's how it works. I think if you feel like you're a direct continuation, you aren't actually. You just feel like you are because you have the memories of that person, right? If you're a copy, you're the copy. It's not, you're flipping a coin. They definitely gave that sort of in this that paradigm to this game. They said, it's like flipping a coin. Every time you make the switch, you got a 50% chance of becoming the, either the new guy or your old guy. And that's not true at all, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense, and it just isn't true. The reality is, who you are, you will remain to be. That won't change. The copy will start existing the moment you've been copied, and that copy will believe itself to be a direct continuation, but it is not. So when we were Simon 2.0 and we had to become Simon 3.0, Simon version 3.0, we actually stopped playing as Simon 2.0 and began playing as Simon 3.0. So I don't think that was a direct continuation at all. Rather, I think we stopped being one character and became a totally different character. And then the character we were was left behind to be isolated and alone, while the new character we adopted believed itself to be the original character, which is horrifying. The last thing that I'll touch on, I know this video is getting a little bit long maybe for just dialogue, right? Just me talking at you. But the scientific realism and the speculation of, what it might be like in the future if we are able to someday download our consciousness into a computer is phenomenal. There are experts right now who are working towards these kind of goals, and I think we're very far away from reaching those goals, but you know, it's still very thought-provoking to consider the impacts of what life might be like if and when we reach that point. All in all, I really like SOMA. I think it's a great game. I'm really glad that I replayed it, and I'm really glad that you joined me for it. Thank you again. Thanks so much for supporting the channel. Let me know what your thoughts are. You know, how did you feel during these different parts of the game? Was there any like 1 or 2 points that stuck out to you particularly that you just like really impacted you? You know, what were your thoughts? Did you feel like something I had done was incorrect, or what would you have done differently? You know, and of course, if you're not already subscribed, please feel free to do so now. Like the video, you know. Yeah. And if you have any feedback, let me know. And of course, always, I'm open to hear what game you'd like to see me play next. Yeah. And with that, I just want to say thank you again. I appreciate you sticking through it with me and sharing in this experience. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.